Hey there, how's it going everybody? Dan here with plantabundance.com. Today I want to share with everybody some of the earlier beginnings prior to the start of the YouTube channel. This picture here was shot back in 2010, just prior to our move to the new location that you are all familiar with. But back then, we just had a small little cottage, my wife, my stepson, and I. And here's a picture of me out in the front yard watering my annual garden. I had some tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, corn. I've always loved annual gardening. And it wasn't until 2011 when we relocated to our current location that we were blessed with this large blank canvas of a backyard, southern facing. You really couldn't ask for anything better to start a project like what I was interested in doing, which was a food forest. There was an initial cleanup that had to take place, so I stayed busy. I ordered one of those dumpsters, had it delivered to the driveway, and I kept filling it up. There was all sorts of debris in the yard. But even during this part of the process, although it was laborious, it was a labor of love. You can see I had to dig a hole here. I was digging holes all throughout the yard, just pulling trash out of it. And I just knew that I was starting the process of rehabilitating this property, and I was just already feeling fulfilled by that. So after a lot of digging and a whole lot of tilling, cleaning up this landscape, I immediately started doing a sheet mulching using cardboard and wood chips. So as I was laying down this cardboard and starting to rehabilitate the property, I was also planting fruit trees all along the border of the fence line. So that was the very beginnings of the food forest. So I was just keeping busy, plugging away, doing row by row, overlapping that cardboard, making sure not to leave any areas where weeds could pop up through, and then putting those wood chips on top. As I was doing that, I was also planting out annuals, and in just a very short time we started to have the makings of a garden. You can see one of the bare root fruit trees I planted over there back by the fence. That was just a stick in the ground a few months ago, and all that was new growth. I've also got a perennial tree collard getting started there. Those two little trees right in front of the mammoth sunflowers there, those were the pomegranate trees that I've featured in many of my videos. Those are doing very well now. And check out how close together I planted those guys. They're like a foot, maybe a foot and a half apart. That's that Dave Wilson Nursery dense fruit tree planting method. So I've been experimenting since the beginning. You can see I also had some of these little chintzy raised beds that I picked up for 10 bucks on blowout sale from a local store. But the garden was beginning. I had corn going, beets, eggplants, Swiss chard, kale, tomatoes, melons. It was also during this first year that I built a small chicken coop and started raising backyard chickens for the first time. I also did a bit of experimenting, like with these seed balls you see here. This is where you encase a few different seeds in some clay and soil, and you can just cast those out through a landscape. What happens is they're protected by that coating, and then once it starts to rain and it breaks down, softens up, the seed will sprout, and they'll have their little bedding right there just made for them. So cool technique, I had fun with that. If you want to learn more about seed balls or just more about natural farming, look into a book called One Straw Revolution about a Japanese farmer and philosopher by the name of Masanobu Fukuoka. Definitely an enlightening text, I highly recommend it. So for year 2 I came up with something totally different, and that was to make these raised beds out of cardboard, chicken wire, and 3-foot T-posts. This actually worked out really well. It was a really cheap way to get raised beds built and start growing immediately. And it also allowed me to create somewhat of a template that was adjustable, and nothing here was permanent. So in the end, I got to say, this really worked out, and I was happy with the results. So here's another view from the side. And to this day, my garden maintained this layout. So in between the raised beds, those are my current pathways. And where those raised beds were, all became perennial garden beds for the most part. To save on cost, I filled these raised beds halfway up with free local wood chips. I then filled the second half up with native soil mixed with some organic imported compost. As a finishing touch, I mulched the top surface using straw rather than hay. Hay will contain grass and weed seeds in abundance, and I'm not trying to propagate that. So unless the hay is thoroughly rotted down, I'd suggest sticking to the straw. Many aspects of the design have changed and evolved since this time. As you can see in this area, I've got this swing hanging from this enormous tree. This tree was going over both sides of the fence, and you could see by the shadow being cast just how large the tree actually was. So I knew from the gate that I probably was going to take this tree out, but I didn't do it up front, and at this point removal was much more challenging as I already had established plants everywhere below the tree. You can see I set up a couple ladders as this limb begins to fall. It's trying to block that fall from landing on some of the smaller trees. There you go. Oh, that worked great. Well, somehow I got really lucky and I only busted up a couple trees. This all-in-one almond, unfortunately, but had I not even told you, you wouldn't have noticed because the tree looked great all season. And also this mandarin tree, which had already been struggling and I had already transferred it from a different location, so no real big loss. But learn from me, if you start a new project, if you are considering taking out a tree, get it done in the beginning. Don't feel bad, you're going to be planting a whole bunch more trees and you'll be saving yourself a whole lot of headache. But back to year 2 now. Things were starting to grow in and they're actually coming along quite well. I had set everything up on an automatic drip watering system, and I also was planting things out in the square foot gardening method. And again, I had another great year. Everything was very productive. It turned out well. As you can see, Alice is standing here in front of some Japanese long eggplants and some towering tomato plants. So we had an abundance of produce coming out. Just a good feeling. I continued experimenting with other techniques like this off-the-grid automatic plant watering system, an idea that I picked up over from Larry Hall. I may have to revisit a setup like this in the future. And as year 2 came to a close, I was feeling happy, satisfied, and again, just looking forward now to year 3 to continue this project forward. So year 3 came in. A lot of the perennials now were starting to get established, the in-ground plants like these purple tree collards towering above me here. At this point I still had some of the cardboard built raised beds going, but a lot of them I had dismantled and started plugging in some trees and such right into the ground, and things were really starting to develop at this point. Check out the growth on these pomegranates after just 2 years in the ground. And I was actually getting fruits on these plum trees. Most of these I actually picked off to allow the tree even more time to build structure. During this time I was tractoring my chickens around the property. Now they remain free range most of the time, but I was using them in this instance to help me better cultivate and prepare the land for garden expansion. So about halfway through our 3rd year here on the property, things really started to take shape. Hey guys, how's it going? I'm Dan and this is Plant Abundance on YouTube.